afternoon, Bluebirds. We are incredibly honored to have in studio a world-renowned conservationist, someone who has dedicated his life to the education and preservation of wildlife, and, fortunately for the community, is the director of our Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens. Welcome, Mr. Maynard, to the Highlands Talk Live.
It's fun to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute privilege and honor to have you talking to our school. It's really awesome. Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Yeah. So I see in here you've brought a friend. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Florida a long time ago, and there was no air conditioning, and all that kids did was go somewhere down to the lake, down to the river, get wet, bang around, and we loved to try to catch animals. And a highly prized catch was an American alligator.
There he is.
So this is one that's almost 2 years old, that lives at the zoo, lives in a pool in our reptile house. His name is Cruncher, and he sort of represents for me both that youth and, you know, the comeback of North American wildlife, because before you were born, these were very endangered animals. They were thought to be disappearing because people had hunted them forever. They sold their skins. They made soup out of their tails. I mean, it was just a mess. But they became protected in 1973 from the Endangered Species Act, and they bounced back. And today, my gosh, there's gators everywhere. So anybody watching should not go swimming in the dark in Florida or Texas or Louisiana, because there's a lot of alligators down there. But they're a neat animal. John, you can pet him if you want. They have those plates on their back, and that's partly for protection. They get bigger as they grow older. And because the only animal that fights with an alligator is another alligator.
Right.
So the males, like him, will eventually have real big bones on their neck, almost like the mane of a lion. So when they try to grab each other, they can have a little defense.
That's awesome.
But he's a good guy, and he's used to being handled. If you caught a wild one like this, he'd hiss and snap and just have a fit because he'd be really scared. But he knows I'm okay, and at the zoo, he gets a lot to eat. He'll eat goldfish, a lot of small fish, sometimes big insects, things like that at this size. And then when they're bigger, they'll either eat bigger fish or bigger meat, you know, like rats or rabbits or something. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, they're a neat animal. They are. And what the heck? I'm glad they made a comeback.
Right. Speaking of kind of a comeback, you know, you've been the director of the zoo. It was USA Today's like 2021 top ranked zoo. Can you kind of talk us through like the work you're proudest of in conservation and helping these animals kind of make a comeback?
You know, our zoo is lucky. Cincinnati's a zoo town. It's not just Cincinnati, it's Fort Thomas, it's the entire region. We're certainly the zoo for Northern Kentucky. Lots and lots of our members are families from Northern Kentucky. You know, the zoo, the thing I'm probably proudest of is the role we play in our community. You know, I often joke that Cincinnati's a zoo town. You know, some towns are football towns. I've been to Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's what that's about. But our zoo, it plays a big role in our community. Going out to schools, kids growing up in zoo camp, things like our Festival of Lights, which is going on now, where hundreds of thousands of people come to visit during the holidays. And that's a neat connection. In terms of how that connects to conservation and wildlife, is zoos are kind of a middle-of-the-road, non-threatening place that people can learn about wildlife and about conservation and how it's important for all of us, rather than, you know, if something felt a little polarized, like, well, you got to be this greenie over here, you got to drive a Subaru or whatever, which I do, it's sort of a joke, versus no, it's important for everybody that the river's cleaner, and because our river's cleaner, we have bald eagles nesting out in Brown County, and they didn't nest from the Second World War until about 10 years ago because the river was so polluted, but it's cleaner now. Well, why is that important? Well, the water we drink comes out of the river.
Right.
So it's more important to us than it is the eagles.
Right.
Yeah, so learning that, getting people aware of that, getting people to support conservation is kind of a sweet spot for us.
Yep.
And we're lucky, you know, it works for us. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, so speaking of, you know, Cincinnati being a zoo town and things that really put Cincinnati on the map, can you talk about our favorite Fiona the Hippo and how she brought the community together, you know. Everyone loves Fiona. I know, I don't mean to speak about myself too much, but last time I went and saw Fiona, I don't remember where they were from, but these women, like, they had flown on an airplane just to see Fiona, and they were so excited. Like, it was like this awesome moment for them because you had the whole world watching, really, you know. So can you talk a little bit about that?
It's been a phenomenon. You know, it happened in 2 or 3 things all simultaneously that really led to that. I think no one had ever seen or raised a baby premature hippo before, so that whole Saved from the Brink piece was a neat story that was captivating. And really at that time of everyone's looking at their phone on videos and Facebook Lives, and all of those things made it so accessible, much more than if it had even just been 10 years before, really made her a phenomenon. And I know that because she was born in 2017, and that year I happened to travel to some of the most remote places. I went to West Africa, to the country of Benin, which is next to Togo. Somebody saw my hat, said, we're sitting on this, this ship, and they say, oh gosh, isn't that where Fiona's from? I'm like, what? This person who's a French speaker. I mean, so yeah, she's our franchise player, that's for sure, yeah.
I know I was listening into you talking to some of the biology students. Could you kind of retell some of those stories about, the people that were there with her 24/7, like feeding her oxygen? Can you kind of talk about that?
I think part of what made it so captivating is no one had done this before, and yet these young keepers, who happen to all be young women, most folks working at zoos today are young women. It's interesting. It's changed completely because it used to be all guys. But they never gave up, and they never thought it wouldn't work. They're like, no, this will work. And so for a period of months, people took turns spending the night with her, not just to observe her, but to hold her, keep her warm on a heated pad on the floor.
Right.
She had a little oxygen tube in her nose because she needed more oxygen. But that's hard to keep in a wild animal. If you ever try to do anything like that with your dog, of course, they'd knock it out. But just being there and comforting her so it would stay in. And one thing led to the next. Now, there were times that many people thought she might not make it. We had a terrible time when she started to lose weight and get dehydrated. She had diarrhea. And in a human, they solved that. You just need to get fluids. They put in a little IV into your vein and you're fine. Well, they couldn't hit the vein, the vets, because they're chubby and the skin is thick. But we called Children's Hospital, and they sent over a couple of specialized nurses who were part of a thing called the Vascular Access Team. And boom, they came over and hit it right away. And their comment was they'd never seen a vein they can't hit. Their other comment was, because she weighed about 30 pounds at that point, that it was the biggest vein they'd ever seen, because they're normally threading it in a little premature human who's about this big, and she was this big. But even later, when we would put her out in the big pool, hippos don't swim, they don't float, they bounce off the bottom. If you ever go there, they're called a river horse, so she would just sink. So she'd have to go push up to the top and breathe and then sink to the bottom. Well, the pool's 10 feet deep and she was only 1 foot tall, and I was nervous. But, our curator said, look, she's a hippo, she's got to know how to live in the water. That's all hippos do. I mean, this is just what they do.
Right.
So, and sure enough, it works, so she did it. And of course now she's big.
Yeah.
And since that time when she needed the IV, she's gained weight ever since. She weighs 1,800 pounds now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh. So you mentioned earlier how you've traveled the world. And we were looking at your history, and so you grew up in Central Florida.
I did, yeah.
And you're very educated. You went to Rollins, University of Michigan, and you went to Harvard.
Yeah, that was in sort of an extension program, but it was good.
Yeah. So can you just talk about how you went from there to the Cincinnati Zoo, the Midwest?
Sure. Well, it was a long time ago, and zoos were a different place. I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan and studied wildlife biology, and I thought, well, gosh, I'll get out of here and I'll go live in Africa, live in a tent and wander around. But along the way, I got married to a woman from Cincinnati who was my college girlfriend. And one day I woke up and I said, I should probably get a job. I don't think I'm going to get to go to Africa. So I didn't know anybody, so I cast about and found someone who had gone to Michigan, my same program, who was teaching at the University of Cincinnati. And she said, well, I don't know anything about jobs, but the zoo's building a new education center. Maybe they need somebody. Well, I had never dreamed of working at a zoo. It was a whole different world then. Zoos were very small budget, less than 100 employees. It was just a little corner zoo. But right place at the right time. They had this ed center. They needed some people to help lead programs, and so one thing led to the next. Today, basically 2 generations later, of kids coming up who'd been zoo volunteers or gone to zoo camp, hundreds of young people would apply for a job like that. But back then it was like, I don't know. This kid showed up, I could give him a job, right? It was a different thing. So it was sort of right place at the right time. But it was a good fit, with what I do and my interest in wildlife and the role that the zoo plays in the community. So, advice I'd give to anybody as they think about their work, try to follow the path as you can, something you're really interested in, something you really care about, and one thing can lead to the next.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. I know you talked about how like the zoo had changed from like the time you started to obviously now. Obviously, a big change has been the coronavirus pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about how you treat or like vaccinate the animals through this time and everything?
Yeah. Not everybody might know, but our zoo has vaccinated most of our animals. We've not all of them, but all the predators like the cats and the wild dogs and such, all the primates, the monkeys, the lemurs, the great apes. We also vaccinated our giraffes because they are one of the few animals that come in direct contact with people, where people feed them, and the vets just thought that would be good to play it safe. There aren't any known cases of giraffes catching the coronavirus, but white-tailed deer have been known to get it, and so similarly, perhaps they could. So the keepers, just to play it safe, did that. The keepers now all wear masks when they're real up close with their animals. Prior to the pandemic, for many years, our primate keepers have done that. They've worn gloves and worn masks because the risk of zoonotic diseases, not just COVID, but others, they could catch a human cold, they could catch the flu. We've been cautious about it, so they're used to that. But yeah, the virus, just like for people, it's a great leap forward for the zoo to make sure that we don't lose our animals. Some zoos have lost snow leopard, tigers, and a number of zoos as close as Louisville, some of their primates caught the virus, but they survived.
That's good. Kind of switching gears, I know you co-authored a book with Jane Goodall, Hope for Animals in their World. Yeah. So can you kind of talk about your experiences and how she kind of influenced your views on conservation?
Sure. Well, I'm sure everybody watching knows who Jane Goodall is. She's the most renowned, most beloved, most trusted person in wildlife, and for good reason. She's 100% genuine. She's a 98-pound vegetarian from the south of England and tougher than anybody else. But boy, she works at it. She's 87 years old and still works every day communicating. Now she's doing it on Zoom from her family farm because of the pandemic, but I'm sure by next year she'll be back at it out on the road. And working hard to get people to be aware that protecting nature is in our own best interest, and it's also the right thing to do. And I have been lucky to travel with Jane and write the book with her, and just very heartening. As I joke, I got to sing backup in the Jane Goodall band. That's how it really worked. We did write a book together, but it was pointed out by the publisher. It's a Jane book, not a Jane and Thane book.
Yep.
That's how you sell
That's awesome.
sell books.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Maynard, we understand that directing a zoo comes with some challenges that you can't always predict. So there's some uncontrollable events, and the zoo's always done a good job of rebuilding and coming back better. And so obviously with Fiona the Hippo. So how do you continue to maintain a positive relationship with the community and those around you?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point because the zoo is right in a neighborhood. We're on the edge of uptown, near the hospital district, near the university, but also in a residential neighborhood. And it can create conflict because the zoo over the years has grown to be the #1 attraction in the city and the #1 attraction in the county. And we're open every day. So that issue about, as the zoo grows, the issue about traffic jams, our Festival of Lights is kicking off this week, and that gets very busy. So don't drive right by the zoo tonight at 5 o'clock unless you want to wait in traffic. And so working that out with your neighbors, trying to solve those problems. And we've had some success. Over the past decade, we built our great big lot on Vine Street. We call it the Solar Lot because of the panels. We're building another great big lot across the street, again, to get the cars off the road. That's better for our customers, and it's also better for our neighbors. So trying to work with the neighbors, make sure they know what we're doing and why. That certainly helps. Everybody can tell if you're telling the truth, and if you meet with them, say, this is what we're doing. It's worked out well. So we try real hard to be good neighbors in Avondale and throughout the community. We can't let the animals loose at the zoo, but we do take our plant program through the Botanical Garden like crazy. We partner with the Reds Community Fund every year in the redoing of ballparks and rec centers, which includes a lot of botanical aspects to really soften it up. We put in this last summer, the darndest thing you ever saw, at Rockdale Academy, which is a public school a block from the zoo, urban school. A great big multi-acre urban learning garden. It's the darndest thing you ever saw. And all in, the expense was about $1 million. And the zoo doesn't have the money, but we know how to plant plants. So the funding was through Kroger and Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Proctor. but the work was the zoo. And it's a center that the kids at Rockdale and others in the neighborhood can really learn from and benefit from. So we try to do that kind of thing where we can.
Yeah.
I know the Festival of Lights just started.
Yeah.
My mom was watching last night
Yeah,
live. She was
good.
so excited. Can you kind of explain some of the events and maybe volunteering opportunities for kids our age that the zoo provides
Sure.
if they're looking to be interested in that?
Yeah, we've had a volunteer program for a long, long time, and probably the most vibrant part of it now is called Zoo Teens. And it is, as advertised, for students, 13 to 18. Typically, they're from middle school to high school, and then they sort of time out from there, and they could become an adult volunteer. But it's really become a substantive program. It's important to the zoo because the students come, they learn about things, and they can play a role out on the grounds. They might interpret to the public, they might work in the children's zoo, they might do various things. But it also has a lot of learning for the students as well, the volunteers. And it's neat that getting that experience, it could not just be the zoo. I'm sure you can do something like that at the Newport Aquarium or the Nature Center or museums, is really valuable, particularly when you're young, because you might say, oh gosh, I really want to work at a zoo, or oh gosh, I really want to be a veterinarian. But until you're around it, you wouldn't realize, oh, well, that involves a lot of poop, right? Or in the case of a vet, oh, wow, that involves a lot of blood, or, things that are common sense, but it's different to experience it than it is to hear about it. So, so Zoo Teens, folks could look on the zoo's website, cincinnatizoo.org, and follow the thread. It's probably either under education or volunteers, and look at how to get involved with it. But it's a neat program.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So obviously, you said the zoo's the #1 attraction in Cincinnati, right?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of things that put Cincinnati on the map. So you got the Big Red Machine, obviously, and the Flying Pig, Graders. You got Skyline.
Mm-hmm.
So how does it feel to be part of the Cincinnati package?
It is sweet that it is that kind of thing. That's how involved I feel that the zoo is in the community. An example of that is I could go, I don't know where the nearest gas station is, but go to a store or a gas station right here in Fort Thomas, and if I have on a zoo coat or a hat, somebody would come up and start to tell their zoo story. Oh my gosh, my kids grew up going to the zoo, and then my daughter was in zoo camp, and then she became a veterinarian. I mean, so many parts of this town, the zoo plays a big role in those families' lives. So I think that's part of what it is. We've been here a long, long time, and Cincinnati loves its traditions, long-held traditions. And as a result, yeah, we have really sort of become a zoo town, and we probably are on that list with, like you said, with the Reds and Graders. If you're with Graders, that's as good as it goes. Partnership with Graders and Fiona. Yeah.
Definitely.
They made a Fiona ice cream for a couple of years. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, Cincinnati Zoo is a big part of the community. Lots of families are involved. What advice would you have for kids that are, thinking about a career in, environmental science or conservation?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a very good question because it is not as easy a career to define as, say, you go to college and you major in biology and you say, I want to be a veterinarian. Well, there are very specific steps, all right? You've got to make sure you get A's in organic chemistry. You've got to make sure you can test so you're well enough to get in. And then you've got, 3 more years of vet school, and then you've got to do it. So all those steps. And at the end of that process, which is a number of years, but okay, and now I'll be a vet. Same biology degree, when you say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I want to work in conservation, or I want to work in anything to do with protecting the environment. It's not an easy 1, 2, 3 step, and now I'm there, right? So it's following opportunities as they avail themselves. Certainly good to do if you can volunteer during high school is great. When you're in college, opportunities do avail themselves. There's summer internships, there's summer opportunities to work with professors that might be doing research, somewhere. Sometimes it's really exciting. You go to the Bahamas and go scuba diving. Sometimes it's catching wall lizards, those little Lazarus lizards that live around here because they're scientists that study that kind of thing. But the truth is, while it sounds fun to go to the Bahamas or the Serengeti, biology is biology. If people are studying whether it's behavior or physiology, an awful lot can be learned right next to home, too. So I wouldn't think anybody should limit themselves by saying, well, yeah, if I had a lot of money, I'd be able to do this really cool thing. Well, between here and there, you got to take the steps you can take. And especially at college, if you ask around, there are professors that will be doing work that you would probably be interested in. And if you show enough interest, they'd probably say, all right, you can tag along and help me do this. And it might seem boring at first, like you're cleaning test tubes or you're carrying, clipboards, or collecting data on your phone. But that's how the steps start, one at a time, you know. People often say that grad school is basically indentured servitude. You know, you do whatever the professor says and shut up and go do it.
Yeah.
But you also learn the whole process through that. So, yeah, and the more you can find something that really seems like the right fit, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, kind of going off your advice, what advice would you just have for like our school community? Like, how can we be better conservationists? How can we protect
Sure.
our world more?
Well, that's a great question because, again, sometimes people have this myth that other places are green. Like, oh, well, if I was in Portland, Oregon, yeah, they get it done out there. That is not true. Some areas and some efforts in Cincinnati and the Cincinnati region are phenomenal. Our zoo, as an example, people that come from zoos on the West Coast, like Seattle and San Francisco and Portland, are, you know, oh, you guys live in the Rust Belt. Our zoo's the greenest zoo in America by miles. With our solar arrays, we've been able to cut our electricity use from the grid by 25%. With newer equipment for heating and HVAC, we've been able to cut our natural gas consumption by half by just putting in higher efficient systems. By the way, we were able to recycle rainwater. We save a ton of money. Like Fiona, for instance, swims in rainwater, the polar bears, the penguins. The waterfalls and moats are all rainwater, which is a huge savings. And that savings allows us to reinvest in better equipment for the gas and electricity savings. So everybody can do that. It's about doing things smarter. You know, you could bike more, you could talk your folks into buying an electric bike and they could keep up with you and they could bike more too. You know, you can drive less or have a much higher efficient car. There are many, many things that all of us can do. And we live in an age where it's very easy to find all those. You can look on the zoo's website, there's a lot of tips. But this idea of how do you cut your own carbon footprint sounds like, oh, okay, it's about my carbon footprint. But the truth is, climate change is real and the great big threat we face, and it's the biggest pressure that wildlife faces as well, whether that's in the oceans as they warm and acidify, whether it's as the ice melts and things like polar bears have a hard time, or it's disappearing forests. The less fossil fuel we use, the less energy we use, the more that actually helps slow that down. So it's all tied together. Beyond that, a great thing to do is get involved with others. Whether it's locally, there's a thing called the Cardinal Land Trust, which is a multi-county program where they're trying to protect, you know, a farm here, a piece here, rather than let it all turn into subdivisions. There's all sorts of different versions, whether it's the state chapter of the Nature Conservancy or through the local nature centers. Direct ways you can get involved. And what's inspiring about that, particularly when you're young, is you'll be around other like-minded people and learn more of what's good and what's happening and what could be done.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of ended on a high note. We have, well, this is a little bit farther away than I thought it was. Okay, we have a little gift for you
great.
from Highlands just to thank you
Oh,
for
well,
your
thanks.
time.
You know, I'd never been here before, and this is such a nice welcome. Look, I've got my Stay Hydrated water bottle with a fancy reusable straw, and wait for it, the hoodie.
Go Birds.
That's right, Highland Bluebirds. I loved out front when I pulled up. I knew I was in the right place when the sign said, "It's a great day to be a bluebird." I thought that is such a nice sign. Well, that's fun. I'll wear that.
Thank you.
That's fun.
I mean, thanks again for your time
Yeah.
and for
Thank
all
you
you've
very
done
much.
for our community.
Well, thank
This
you.
was
and
always a positive
here's to
experience.
Highland.
Yeah,
And what the heck? Do you guys have a game tonight?
No, unfortunately.
not tonight,
No.
but we're getting ready for our basketball season.
Good.
Our basketball team just won the state championship, so we're looking for a
Oh.
good year. It's
That's
gonna be
fun. That's really fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks
good.
again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much to everyone that tuned in. Be sure to head over to the Cincinnati Zoo to enjoy the Festival of Lights and all the other fun events they have throughout the year.
All right. That was fun. You guys did